Observation 1 is a resolution analysis. It's a resolution. The United States federal government should implement a cap and trade policy in the United States via the definition. We'll be defining cap and trade as emission trading permits, market allowed permits in the market. A market to approach like a decrease in pollution. The rest are going to be contextualized outside of PMC right now. Okay, C is going to be the framework of markets around the policy around detail shown in the resolution. We said usually weigh in the lens of utilitarianism, net benefits, whoever is most benefit for most applicable. Load A says it's going to be most predictable. B offers the most grant to both sides, which leads to most clash and fairness in the round. Okay, next is going to be a plan text. The United States federal government should implement a cap and trade policy in the United States. So again, the United States federal government should implement a cap and trade policy in the United States. After it's going to be United States federal government, normal ways and means, and as soon as possible. Any questions? Okay, next is going to be solvency. Little 1 is that this model off the one in California where there is no significant decrease for small businesses or investment in those areas. So the argument is that this actually increased green technology investment in California is leading the leading states in the United States for green technology. Second is going to be a way to engage in this this is a way to engage in the outside round because a way for
the way to engage with this outside of the round is to vote for policymakers.
The way to engage in this outside of the round to vote for policymakers, like cap and trade in the election. 3 is going to be environmental defense fund defense fund drilling companies decreased production after California plan cost of production became more expensive. The first advantage is going to be colonialism, uniqueness. The first uniqueness point could be oil companies are expanding to native land. Little A is that according to PS Mag, while there's been there used to be an issue, financial assistance by Donald Trump has been increasing the prospect, making it more viable. The Bureau against according to Investigate West, corporations are making operations to the land of the Navajo, Apache, and much more of Native Americans. The second uniqueness argument is expansion is only causing financial. It's because of new regulations in finance, according to CFR. With regulations to new this would increase the unlikelihood of any kind of new drilling because new oil regimen will be too expensive for them to actually be able to be profitable under regulations and taxation. The second argument is according to CNBC, there's no exploitation without government backing right now, which means because it will be a risk too high, which means there's going to be no expansion in California as we empirically see right now. The link is that one plan passes, expansion is going to be seen as unattractive. Little A prior to no regulation, no taxing. You already said it was very, very nice until prior to no regulation, no taxation when there was still in place. It was seen as unattractive, which means it's going to be seen as unattractive again. The B argument is according to Stockholm environmental investigation right now. We see that any kind of continuous projects currently happening right now will be too expensive to be able to continue, so they're going to cancel all of them. The second argument is going to be companies will stop drilling. Little A, so you can cross apply how the underdeveloped land will be too expensive for them to be able to do because of infrastructure, which means no more drilling. The second is that 2020 oil prices have been decreasing in the past few months, which means that it's already really unattractive to have oil extraction internally. So it's going to be a fossil fuel decrease. We see that according to we can cross apply how it's already going to be seen unattractive to be arguments that fossil fuel companies will perceive the plan as a shift away from pro-fossil fuel ideals. The second internal link is going to be land restoration. Little A is according to Earth Justice. With this can clean this will create a lot. Companies can already clean up right now. It's just that there's been no need to be able to do it. However, you can cross apply about the preemptive ideals of shifting away from pro-fossil fuel regulate or ideals. The third internal link is going to be spotlighting. We see that this is going to cause additional public pressure. We see that this will ensure a lot of grassroots organizations and coalitions will be able to actually force these companies to be cracked down upon and actually create this cleanup. The impacts. One is going to be settler colonialism. Little A said we see there's going to be genocide. There's already a lot of genocide and silent crackdowns in the current status quo to the point where only the United States federal government, oil companies know where these lands are at. But it's going to be cultural deaths. We said this is first because 1 in 4 Americans are literally dying in status quo without any kind of without knowing what's actually happening, which means that we need these companies to be able to actually clean it up. Second is that we see that this land is key to allowing them to be able to have rituals, because without this kind of rituals, you're literally disconnecting them from their lands. It's going to be systemic impact. Little A is that we see that these kinds of impacts are not usually solved through policy making, so this comes first. Second is this outweighs on magnitude and probability, because it's currently happening right now and on silent. Second advantage is going to be anthropocentrism. Uniqueness. One is killing animals. So the A said we see a lot of oil demand has been causing offshore drilling, which actually caused an oil spill in Alaska in 2016, which actually caused aquatic life to be behind several decades now on their species recovery. The B argument, the little B argument is that according to Wild Earth Guardians, the top 10 endangered animals are all due to fossil fueling because of the drilling and everything. We see that the key deer was actually isolated into the California islands because they were on a very oil-rich land and they were moved away by companies. The second is the root cause to anthropocentric ideals is because of these profit incentives. So we see that $700 billion in profit has been done because of these oil drillings, which have been further like increasing like these anthropocentric ideals. Second is going to be lobbying. We see that lobbyists spend $200 million every year to be able to prevent any kind of policy change. The link is that one plan passes, one is going to create a policy change that we really need and decrease profit margins. But is that this is going to be, there's no more going to be like any kind of mass profit. We see that according to the Business Insider, this is going to decrease profit by over 70% because we're literally stopping them from drilling land in a significant area. Second is that we see that there's going to be no more lobbying because it's literally fiat. The second is going to be natural restoration. We're going to allow these animals to be able to have their natural habitat like be restored because these companies can no longer drill in those areas because it's going to be too expensive for them to go into the internal links. One is going to be this key to no more fossil fuels. One little A, so we say U.S. taxpayers right now are currently it's not U.S. taxpayers. Like lobbyists are currently like spending a lot of money on this, but the moment that this passes, it's going to create the spotlighting effect, which calls out a lot of the lobbyists and switch over to green alternative energy, so we're no more drilling. Second is going to open up restoration. Once they need to cross-apply the lobbying impact because they can no longer do it. We see that currently like the Society of Ecological Restoration can't even go to these areas because of lobbying that's happening right now. So you see that there are like grassroots organizations that are trying to clean up this land. Impacts of one going to be otherization. Little A, so we see a lot of animals are otherized and they're seen as quote-unquote unnecessary obstacles by these lobbying communities to be able to increase profits. B argument is bare life. You see that they're isolated from a lot of Native American habitat in relation to their natural land. And once again, you can cross-apply to key deer who are literally isolated from their natural habitat into these Florida islands so like they can be thrown aside. Second, it's going to be environmental destruction. We see that one is going to cause a lot of land destruction and exacerbate climate change. We see that if we continue to oil drilling, it's going to cause coastal flooding for 3 million people along the coast. And all these people are also like low-income communities and for natural species, such as the blue mussel.
Colonialism put in environmental.
Also on colonialism, this is literally environmental racism. You should be battling this first. Second is that we see that Native Americans also have like can solve for anthropocentrism because they also have like an own epistemology where everyone's the exact same and ecocentric like mindset, which is why it's also key to be able to solve for both of these impacts first in the round.
I'll be going over theory, neg case, CP, apples.
And the app in order?
Yeah.
Do I need the top like background info sheet and solvency and stuff like that?
No.
Okay.
Can you repeat your neg order?
Yeah. Theory, theory, neg case, CP.
Okay, can you give me a sec? How many sheets would I need for the neg case?
2. Alright, is everybody ready?
One quick sec. Yeah.
Alright, my time will begin. Now the interpretations of the affirmation must specify the
Clear,
amount of
loud.
The interpretations of the affirmation must specify the amount of funding for the cap and trade in the PNC. The violation is that the affirmation does not specify the amount of funding for the cap and trade in the PMC. Standards are that, first of all, depth of education. We cannot really debate anything about a cap and trade if we don't actually know how much or what the cap is on this cap and trade. Basically, it's like a cap on the amount of carbon that you can actually produce, but we don't know what the amount of what the cap actually is. Therefore, we can't really debate or have any kind of educational debate on in depth on this policy because of the fact that we don't know any of the nuances of it. If we don't know the nuances of it, we won't know its effects, and therefore we can't really debate it on things like colonialism because we don't know if these companies are actually going to be really affected by this cap and trade policy, if it's actually going to be pretty ineffective. Therefore, we need the funds to do this, but we simply don't have that. Second of all, ground scoop. Basically, the affirmation can just change whatever funding they want to fit the scheme of the round. This is probably really bad because of the fact that we have no ground to actually debate what this cap and trade policy is going to be because of the fact that we don't have any funding for it, and we can't actually evaluate any of its merits in relation to the status quo or in relation to our counter plan because of the fact that we simply don't know how effective it will be. Third is going to be time skew. The affirmation basically made us read this theory because of the fact that we have literally no way to actually just, have any ground in this round. I can't actually.
We'll get it to you at the end.
So we don't actually have any.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so we don't have any, basically we just have to spend all this time doing this because of the fact that we don't have any really specifics in this round. The baseline of the thing that we're trying to debate on is this cap and trade policy. But at the point where we have no funding, then there's no way that we can actually debate on it. This is why we have to spend all this time. So we're reading this theory shell. Okay, so the vote is this or that. First of all, it's going to be fairness. No one's going to debate if the round isn't fair. Basically, if the affirmationists change their advocacy or alter their advocacy in their later speeches, then there's literally no point in debating because of the fact that the negation is always going to have less ground and less time to actually debate. Therefore, people are going to be quitting debate because of the fact that they see it as not being fair. Instead of actually debating, you could just probably read like an article on cap and trade or something like that, which would give you the same amount of education. And the thing is, if there is no fairness, then there is no debate. Therefore, there is no education, and education is pretty much the only thing we can take out of debate. So you're probably going to be voting. You're going to be having this theory shall be a priority to the case because of the fact that once you know the rules of the game before you can actually play it. Also, you're going to be dropping the debate, not the argument. There are going to be no RBIs. Yeah. Okay. So moving on. So our first advantage is that of grandfathering. So currently, the way cap and trade is organized, basically initially states the government basically gives out permits to these industries on whether or not basically emission permits to these industries, which are for free. So essentially, what this is known as is grandfathering. So with the use of grandfathering, the government basically gives free permits for pollution to these different companies, and they can lose an immense amount of revenue for this transition period, where they're giving out these permits to these companies, and basically they lose the money from giving out the permits in the first place, and from the basic potential money lost from having this transition period. So currently, the links of this are when the plan is passed, the government is going to initiate more grandfathering processes, handing out hundreds of thousands of different free permits to a ton of different industries, which is not going to be regulated basically, and essentially the government is going to lose a ton of revenue during this implementation time frame. Also, there's going to be no solvency for the environment during this implementation time frame because of the fact that these companies have no incentive to actually lower their carbon because they're not actually being taxed for anything. And the economic costs from these emissions are going to basically impede the government from actually using any of this tax money to fix things like infrastructure, to fix things like the EPA, and basically any other projects which it will use this money to do. So the impacts of this are that the economy is going to be negatively impacted by grandfathering because of the fact that the United States federal government is losing a lot of money by giving out these free pollution grants. Also, there's going to be a potential decrease in this is not going to be seen basically with other things like a carbon tax because of the fact that there's no transition period in between where these grants are given. So overall social welfare is going to go down because of the fact that the government is going to be losing money which it would otherwise spend to fund things like infrastructure, to fund things like the Department of Education, to basically use it on things which actually matter. Okay, second advantage of the economy, or disadvantage of the economy. So currently cap and trade schemes with CO2 have not actually reduced emissions in some places in the past. For example, Europe's emissions trading scheme began in 2005, and there was a 21% increase between 2005 and 2009. So you can see this cap and trade really didn't actually do anything. Also, this would harm the poor. So like a 50% decrease in.
So when there's a 15% decrease in carbon emissions, it disproportionately affects the poor, costing 33% of their income.
Oh yeah, so this will basically disproportionately affect the poor, costing 33% of all of their income of low-income families. Yeah, basically.
Okay, so the plan, like the Obamacare plan would decrease 85%. So even with 15%, that much is lost of their income.
Okay, yeah, so, okay. And then it also introduces a leak because of the high price of natural gas basically has, and they probably won't be able to pay for this cap and trade, although we don't really know that from the AFS plan. Also, economists don't like cap and trade because of its unpredictability. Basically, this cap and trade is going to set like a cap on the amount of carbon that you can have before you actually start getting taxed for it. Instead of something else like a carbon tax, which is way more like actually efficient and effective because it sets a clear rate that you can see for proportionally for each ton of carbon you're going to be getting taxed a certain amount. However, cap and trade doesn't really do that. It's basically sets a cap, and then after you pass that cap, you're going to be paying money. So we can see that this cap and trade probably isn't that stable because of the fact that it's kind of unclear as to exactly how effective it will be because of its kind of the nature of its implementation. So when this cap and trade is going to be implemented, investors are going to basically lose a lot of confidence in the U.S. market, and jobs are going to be lost. Also, industries are probably going to relocate because of the kind of the unsustainability or the unpredictability of this cap and trade. So the impact of this is that there's going to be an economic downturn, which would probably be really bad in the current day because of the fact that we're already on the brink of a recession. Okay, moving on to the counterplan. The CP is that the U.S. federal government will implement a carbon tax between $20 and $50 per metric ton of carbon increase.
Text and status.
This is unconditional. And there will be a carbon tax between $20 and $50 per metric ton produced. This amount will increase $10 annually until 2023 when it hits its cap of $50. So the time frame will be as soon as possible. The enforcer will be the U.S. federal government. So for solvency, there are 57 billion tons of carbon being emitted right now in the U.S. In 2019. Therefore, we're probably going to be seeing a really, really big amount of money generated by this tax. Also, there are very similar carbon taxes implemented in Canada and Australia, which are working in status quo. Okay, moving on to F case.
Can I
So-
go tax?
We'll get
They
it to
can
you.
give it to you in flex.
Thank you.
Okay,
Oh,
so
wait,
colonialism,
what's the
so on their colonialism decide, when they say that corporations are going to indigenous land, this probably isn't actually going to be solved by the plan because of the fact that, first of all, there's going to be this grandfathering period where all these companies are still going to be able to go to this indigenous land in this basic time period of implementation. There's probably going to be a lot of violence against indigenous people. Therefore, they're really not solving for colonialism whatsoever. Whereas if we actually have a carbon tax, it's probably going to solve better by making it so that people are going to have immediate repercussions. Also, when they say that there's like, without regulations, or with regulations, new drilling is disincentivized. The same thing is going to be happening with the carbon tax. Also, there's going to be, it's basically the carbon tax is far more of a surefire way to actually ensure that we're going to have positive change. This says small companies are going to be disincentivized from oil drilling. This probably isn't true at the point where the carbon tax is or where the cap and trade is basically a cap on carbon. If these small companies are going to be drilling but not actually reaching the cap of carbon, they're probably not going to be seeing any negative impacts anyway. So you can pretty much drop this. Whereas with our world and the carbon tax, it's actually going to be an impact of the carbon tax proportionally per ton, meaning that if you basically burn any carbon at all, you're going to be seeing the impact of this. So you can essentially drop the vast majority of their impacts. They are also under like anthro whatever. When they say the top 10 endangered species are due to climate change, we agree with this, but we're basically going to argue that we're going to be solving better because we have an increase, or we're basically solving for the climate issue better.
Do you also need text?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, what do you want text on?
Just the counter plan,
CP.
please.
Okay, CP.
Oh, yeah. Here. Okay. Can you write this on the sheet?
And like what it says annually is referring from 2020 to 2022.
Okay, the order is going to be anthropocentrism. Oh, sorry, it's going to be 2 new sheets. Anthropocentrism, colonialism, the counter plan.
I need more paper.
Yeah.
Oh, you have more?
Wait, two sheets
Yeah.
for anthro?
Yeah, 2 new sheets, anthropocentrism,
Thank you.
colonialism, your theory shell, your disadvantages, and then it's going to be the counter plan.
Okay, so just to clarify, 2 new sheets, add 2, add 1, then the theory sheet, then the stuff about grandfathering, then the counter plan. Okay. Please just signpost when you're going over stuff, because I have stuff floating.
Okay, everyone good? Oops. Okay. Everyone good? Is interpretation unification must specify the normative ethical theory they use to whether offense in 1C/LCB's violation unification not specify the normative ethical theory they use to whether offense in 1C/LCC are different that is directed to the H one's double bind. Either law articulates that they go into the app or they establish an framework. Either way, we don't know what they're going for. Instead of LOR, the V argues that this means that neither can always prioritize their impacts. I already gave it.
We can't read it.
Oh, we'll give it to you later. we'll just give it to you. Like, the B argues that this means that negative can always shift out of our friends and prioritize their impact over ours because they can always choose a framework that benefits them and disadvantages us uniquely because it happens in an LOR as a framing argument, which means that you don't get any responses. The second argument is that a rule that H1 in Congress policy because must explain why solving for certain impacts are normatively important to gain federal funding. The B argues that uniquely important because 70% of policy makers are former future bidders, which means that if you instill bad ideology now, people won't be prepared in the future to release zero policy. The third argues that a reciprocity H1 we specify you should too to ensure procedural fairness. The B1 also ensures class because neither team can shoot out of often see voters versus fairness. The internal education ballot debate also skill evaluation, which means that you can just vote versus presumptions and you can't evaluate the rest debate. Since education debate is only funded because of education. And third, a priori, you gotta know the rules can be overplayed. And four, paradigm issues, A competing interpretations of reasonability, because reasonability prevents education and fairness debating theory. B1 RBS are bad because they encourage abuse behavior since no one will be incentivized to run theories. C1 drop the debater, not the argument, because the damage had already been done and it's debater's fault, not the argument. Next. Age interpretation and negation must specify the branch of government used to implement the counterplan text in a 1C/LOC visa violation. The negation did not specify the branch of government used to implement the counterplan text in a 1C/LOC. The little i's this doesn't specify to us because we're bound to the resolution. Well, they aren't, and they aren't. Sierra to Stanford is that a real. The H1's real affairs are very complex. Using different branches of government, the past plan will have very different outcomes. For example, passing a plan through a post office will have very different outcomes compared to passing a Congress. The B argues that in addition, the University of Washington conducted a study of their parliamentary debate team. We found that 90% of the education garden through debate was actually through discussing the implementation process of different policies, so they get rid of 90% of the education right off the bat. The second argument is ground the H1s that without specifying these specific agent leads to quality to disadvantage leads because they become generic and uncontextualized. The B points that we also lose access to key arguments like Trump banning Congress by. The third argument is that of topic education, H1s the topics aren't repeated that often, so just keep go as in depth as possible to access fairness to education, which means going into depth about what the branches of government do. The B points that going into depth better because leads to better orientation, which leads to better class, which is the internal link to fairness education around cross-apply the voters. On to Anthro. On Anthro, what's the argument they make on Anthro? Well, the first argument is that their argument on Anthro went over time, which means that you probably shouldn't evaluate it, but the second argument, wait, what's your argument? They say that they solve through the counter plan. We would articulate that they don't because it doesn't solve for companies producing it in the first place. Companies can still produce it. There's no like cap that says that you cannot produce it, which means that these companies are always going to be floating because it's still profitable, which means that all these impacts are still going to be happening. You can extend the impact level that says that you should be preferring this first because it otherizes others, but additionally it's a systemic impact, which means that you should be prioritizing it most. But even then, they have conceded that it outweighs on probability magnitude, not only because it hurts humans, but it also hurts all non-human living beings, which means that we're definitely outweighing on magnitude and a probability because it's happening on the 100% of time. Yeah.
They also conceded California thumper dishonesty, which means that we literally solve it.
Yeah, they have also conceded the California thumper that says that we're uniquely able to solve for, historically have been able to solve for because companies have been listening to it, even with things like grandfathering, even if those things like exist and stuff like that. Aside from that, like the Anthro page is like completely conceded. You should have a very high threshold for MO answers because first of all, because they could have already answered it, but secondly, they chose not to like answer it, which means that you should have a high threshold since they didn't see this as important. Yeah.
Can you tell me what normative ethical theory is?
Yeah, a normative ethical theory is like a philosophical framework that guides action, so you can do things like deontology, consequentialism, and stuff like that. Okay, cool. On colonialism, they make a couple arguments here. The first argument, they say that grandfathering is not going to be solving for this. The first argument is that this is, first of all, this is definitely not true, especially at the point where they where in the counterplan they can still expand. The oil companies can still expand, but the affirmation plan stops us. It puts a cap on it. But the second argument is that you have conceded spotlighting is uniquely key to cap and trade because it puts a spotlight on these companies, which stops them and makes them embarrassed because they're like hurting all these communities, which makes them uniquely stopped. But the third argument is that this is a defensive response, which means that if anything, you're going to be giving us a risk of like offense. But the next argument, they make this argumentation that the carbon tax is going to be solving, but our argument once again is that like you don't solve for like the root cause. Companies can still produce stuff and like that. The rest of the colonial advantage is pretty much conceded. They don't interact with the specific line by line, especially the impact level that impact frame that says that you should be doing it first because like doing it first. I want to expand specifically the B point under the first impact that says that 1 in 4 natives are dying like perpetually, which means that that's an endless slaughter kind of impact, which has infinite magnitude since the extinction level. It happens forever. 1 in 4 natives will continue dying without the affirmation plan, which means that we are outweighing on extinction, but also it's a systemic impact for Native Americans, which is that you should be voting for it first. Okay, on the affirmations theory show. Counterinterpretation, the affirmation may choose whether or not not to specify the funding for their cap and trade policy in the PMC. Okay, counterstance. First debate is the hard debate. Hard debate is good debate because it increases the amount of critical thinking. The second, which they uniquely say is the good. The second argument they say, but we would also articulate times two. Our only reason why we had to read the affirmation, like the theory shows, is to like weigh it against this theory, so we wouldn't lose on the layering. But the second argument is that. But we also have to waste time on this theory shell, which means that we're not able to like debate the substance of the debate. The third argument. Anything else?
Yeah, I literally asked if there were any questions
Yeah.
on their plan text,
Okay.
which means we
On
get
their
terminal defense.
On their terminal defense, we specifically asked if they had any questions after the plan text, and they specifically said no, which means that they don't see this as important. But the second argument is that the second argument is that they don't have a period at the end of their interpretation, which means that it's impossible to validate, which means that you can just vote for some presumption, you can't evaluate it. But the third argument is that they only ask for the funding when we and ask for the funding, not the amount of money that needs to be put on like the what's it called? The cap and trade, like the things, whatever it's called, which isn't called funding. Those are which isn't funding. Funding is just the amount of money you put towards the plan text. No funding is needed, which means that no funding is needed. But additionally, we also articulate normal ways and means, which means that we'd probably meet this anyway. Standards. On their first argument, they say that they cannot debate. But first of all, no proven abuse, especially at the point where they're able to engage with the affirmation plan. But secondly, we would articulate that they'd be able to engage with it more because they'd be able to run any disadvantage, any evidence they talk about how cap and trade is bad, they'd be able to use because we don't specify. The second argument, they say the ground, but we would say we actually increase the amount of ground because once again, you can use any kind of evidence you find because you can always say that it's contextualized to us since we're defending the whole res. But the second argument that we asked and they didn't say anything, which means it's not important. The third argument, they say times 2, cross my times 2 argument here, but additionally, we say that you're actually decreasing the amount of time because I have to spend less time on case, which I'll go to now. Grandfathering. On the first argument, they say that, the overview here is that this is empirically denied. In California, this did not happen. Even if it did, emissions went down, which means that we're able to solve. Okay, yeah.
I like California over Europe.
Yeah, you should. They give you this word about on the links. Oh wait, sorry, that's
on the second.
okay. They make this argumentation that there's going to be free things that they give to companies. The first one, this is probably not true, especially at the point where the United States federal government wants you to make money. But secondly, this is integral to it to the whole thing functioning, which means that for it to function in any way, it would probably have to work. But third of all, you can spotlight. You can cross by the arguments I gave you earlier about how there's spotlighting and how these companies would be uniquely embarrassed because of the affirmation plan. Go on to the economy. On the economy, they make this argument. They say the EU, but we say this is not contextualized to the United States. We give you specific analysis as to how it worked in California, which is not the EU. But secondly, we say that we're uniquely able to solve for this because we put a cap over it. We don't put it anything. Okay, counterplan. Permutation, data plan, and non-counter parts of the non-counter part is the entirety of the counterplan. Okay. Solvency, we're able to solve for the root cause. We're able to put a cap on it, and you guys also only hurt small businesses since they're unable to afford it and don't hurt big businesses. For these reasons, we should go for yeah.
The normative ethical theory shell, the two T shells, the funding T shell that we did, and then the andro advantage, the colonial, the empowering an economy, and then CP.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat the word?
Yeah, so your two T shells are T shell, anthro, colonialism, grandfathering, economy, and CP.
Are the two first shells in the order that it was read?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready? Yeah, my time begins. Onto their first theory. We're going to provide a counter-interpretation. The negation must specify normative ethical theory other than utilitarianism if asked. Again, the negation must specify normative ethical theory other than utilitarianism if asked. I'll get to it again. So our counter standard is going to be breadth of education. So our interpretation allows for broader, specific.
Yeah, broader or specific debate.
Okay, broader or specific debate. So when we're able to default to the normal weighing mechanism in debate, which is utilitarianism, we're allowed to we have the opportunity to go through a larger breadth of education and learn more in debate. This is also for ground because when wait, it's not right. Okay. Another counter standard is going to be ground because when we get you're going to be skewing us out of the round when we're not allowed to like provide utilitarianism as our what's it called? Normative ethical theory, even though we want to, because now you're forcing us to just to scramble and find one that will fit the requirements of the negation. So moving on. So yeah. So for voters, you're gonna be. So our voters are gonna be fairness, and you're gonna be putting fairness above anything else in the round because without fairness there is no debate because no one's gonna debate if it's not fair. And so yeah, you're not gonna be putting education. You're not gonna be putting education first because because fairness can exist without education, but education cannot exist without fairness. So that's okay. Moving on. Okay. Second T-shell. Our counter interpretation is that the neg must specify one branch of government in the.
Using the CP if asked by the.
Okay. If asked, okay. The negation must specify the one branch of government used in the CP if asked by the affirmation. The negation must specify. Okay, so yeah, that's our counter interpretation. Our counter standards are going to be breadth of education again. So cross apply everything from the other T-shell. Next times do 2 T-shells. So we have to respond to 2 T-shells run by the app. So anything they tell you about how they're wasting time, we're literally wasting double the amount of time responding to their 2 T-shells. Our voters is going to be fairness again. Cross apply everything from the other one. But just to reiterate, fairness comes before. First, because without fairness there is no debate. Onto our T-shell. They say their counter interpretation. Okay, their counter interpretation is that the okay, I'm just gonna be moving on to Amthra. What? Okay. Okay, so is this okay, sorry. So actually go back to the grant, the funding, the funding T-shell I gave you. They tell you that they asked for a question in the speech, but like just remember how like we said slow and clear a lot of times, and like the fact that we said it so many times means that they weren't slowing down and weren't getting clear and clear. And the reason we couldn't like actually stop and respond to their question when she asked if we had questions after the plan text is because we were so busy. We were busy flowing because they wouldn't slow down. So yeah, so any opportunity they might have given us to ask a question about the funding completely is mitigated by the fact that we were too busy flowing even after we said slow and clear a couple times. They said the standard there's no proven abuse, and we can still engage with the AF plan. But like if you look to the fact that when you don't provide funding, and one of our disadvantages is literally the economy, which relies on the funding of the affirmations plan, there is really like it takes away half of our offense, and there's really like no way we can interact anymore. So there is proven abuse. They tell you that we have to spend time. They have to spend time. Reading their theory, but like I said, we had to respond to 2 of their T-shells while which had really no proven abuse. While we're telling you while our T-shell has a real proven abuse. So again, back to our voters, you're going to be putting fairness above all because when one team, and you're going to be dropping the debater because when one team violates like the fairness in debate, you're going to be dropping the debater because they are because they're being unfair. Okay, on to Anthro finally. Okay, they tell you that anything they tell you about how like we agree with things like fossil fueling is like harming animals and things like that, but the AF is probably not going to solve because of the grace period given by grandfathering and the permits that are given by grandfathering. You need to remember that cap and trade, even though there's a cap, you can still surpass that cap and just pay a fine. So and they tell you that companies can still produce with the carbon tax, but yeah, the whole point of the carbon tax is to make it severe enough so that these companies will really think twice before like going past like a certain limit, because that's how much the tax will be. Yeah, and it's important to realize that you can still exceed the cap of cap and trade if you pay the fine. Anything else on this? Oh yeah, so this completely skews them out of their access to their links and their impacts, because the counter plan is going to be solving for this better, because we see that with the carbon tax, we will be creating a more effective solution in like preventing these companies from stopping. And we've given you solvency in other countries in Europe, so we see that it has worked. We're not giving you a state example, we're giving you a national example, which you're probably going to be preferring versus their California example, because the workings of a country can be more closely related to the United States than the workings of an individual state. Moving on to their colonialism. We tell you that the plan won't solve because of grandfathering, the grandfathering time period. So in this time period, we can still see that these oil companies are able to like go into native land and exploit, and also the cap and trade does nothing to like get these oil companies out of the native land. So yeah, and the carbon tax with the carbon tax, people will actually have immediate repercussions, and a lot of these small companies that don't ever reach there's only one cap set, and a lot of these small companies which don't even reach that high cap can continue to let out exorbitant amounts of carbon emission at no cost. So this is really, really problematic, because you see that small companies, which are probably a majority of the industry, are still able to release carbon emissions with no consequence. So that's why you're not going to be voting on colonialism advantage. Grandfather, they tell you that in California, they just tell you it's not true, and you're going to prefer California over Europe. But like I said before, you're going to prefer a country. You're going to prefer a country example over a state example, even though the state is in the United States, because the workings of the country are more similar. Onto their perm. This perm won't work because, first of all, there's less efficacy when you're doing two plans of the same nature. You're splitting the professionals, you're splitting the funding, which they didn't even mention. So we can't really accept this perm. And which is why you're going to be probably valuing the CP over anything else in the round. Thank you.
So I'll quickly be touching on theory, then I'll be going more on to the case.
Yeah, what's the order?
Order is going to be,
Unless you want a new sheet.
no. Normative ethical theory, then the specified branch of government, the CP theory, then the funding theory.
Where do add 1, add 2, the disadvantages of the counter plan go?
What do you say?
Where does the rest of it go? The advantages and counter plan and the disad. Just on the bottom? Just on the bottom?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll tell you where I am when I get there.
Okay, sounds good.
So, time will end. Now, you're probably not really going to be one to value any of their theory shows because of the fact that these are really, not really that big in the scope of the debate. First of all, when they say that we have to provide normal ethical theory, we're probably just going to provide it if asked, because of the fact that it's really kind of standardized that we're using utilitarianism as like pretty much all of the ethical theory in all of these debate rounds, in all of these policy rounds. It's really kind of normal to do that. It's not anything which is deviating from the norm. So they should probably ask it if they actually wanted it, and if they weren't just trying to run frivolity to take up our time and just trying to get an easy one on this round. That's probably also why you're going to be preferring our counter interpretation. You're probably not going to be preferring their interpretation. Moving on, you're also not going to be preferring their interpretation of that we must specify the branch of government in the CP text, because of the fact that we give them more than enough information to actually debate this round. They probably don't need to know the branch of government in the CP in the plan, in our counter plan, because of the fact that we have the amount of funding, and this is probably just going to go through normal ways and means. It's probably going to be implemented by the enforcement of the U.S. federal government, which we said in our own speech. This probably isn't actually that consequential in the round, and therefore they don't actually lose that much ground or that much effort.
I think this argument that normal ways and means that like you meet our interp is a new argument.
I think it's more that like normal ways and means. I'm kind of just like extending what was said on the CP. Yeah.
I mean, like, it seems kind of, yeah, but I don't know. I'll see like where you go with the argument. I'll like make sure that whatever I evaluate at the end of the round is not new. That I will start.
Okay. Resuming at time. Now, therefore, they probably don't really lose that much ground in depth or fairness because of the fact that they already have enough information to actually debate this round, because they really only need the funding and the fact that it is enforced by the U.S. federal government, not really the branch, which is done, especially kind of like within the context of this round. This is probably enough information for them to debate. So you're probably going to be voting that it's more of a time skew for us because of the fact that we have to respond to these two T-shells, which are run by the affirmation, and therefore that makes this round extremely unfair because of the fact that I have to spend my time doing this instead of debating what the case is. So moving on to our theory shell about specifying the funding. So yeah, we literally cannot debate this round without knowing the funding because of the fact that this is completely like some mythical number of the cap and trade, whereas the cap and trade is literally the funding of the cap and trade is literally the only thing which actually makes the cap and trade useful. As we said before, they didn't really contest this. The cap and trade is a limit on the amount of carbon that you can produce. If we don't know the limit on the amount of carbon we can produce, this plan literally means nothing within the round. Therefore, we have no ground because of the fact that they can make it anything. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't know what it's been this entire time. Therefore, we can't actually substantiate any of their claims or any of our claims because none of it actually means anything if we don't know any of this funding. We have provided the funding for our plan with like the $20 to $50 in our plan. We were just saying that they should do the same, and that's not explode our ground. However, they have not done that. They still haven't provided us with anything. They still haven't provided us with any number about the cap and trade. So yeah, really we have no actual ground in this round. Also, this has still been a time skew. When they say that we're like skewing them out of the time in the round, they just ran two T-shells. They probably skewed us at double the time of the round because of these two T-shells. You're also going to be wanting to weigh this theory shell over all the other theory shells in this debate because of the fact that it probably causes the most rule breakage onto us because of the fact that we literally cannot debate or substantiate any of their claims.
I think this argument about how you should be prioritizing your theory shell over ours is a new argument, like specifically since like it frames out a lot of like our articulation about our theory shells.
You get to respond.
I think it's more just like seeing. It's more like a comparison of like what the kind of magnitude of the like effects of the T-shells on the round is.
Yeah, I think it's weighing.
Yeah, it's like more way.
I wouldn't really evaluate it as like a framing claim, or like a sequencing claim at this point. But if you like make the argument about like rule breakage, I'm not sure that you're finished. Then I think it's just fine.
Okay. Yeah. So my time will resume. Now, and since the affirmation has not really actually consolidated for any of the rule breakers that they've done to us, with the depth of education of this round being pretty much nothing because we have to spend all of our time on theory instead of actually doing anything about the case, and they really can't make any of their claims substantiated because we don't actually know what the effect of this is, and we can't do that either because, as I said before, we have no clue what this cap and trade funding is. We don't actually know what's going on in this round. Therefore, you're probably going to be like presuming that this T-shell is going to be weighed over everything else because they can actually interact with our counter panel and we cannot interact with theirs because of the fact that we don't actually know what it is. I guess we're going to be favoring our standard of fairness over like pretty much everything else in the round because of the fact that we literally can't have no ground in this round as long as we don't know what they're funding for their what they're funding for the actual cap and trade is. Yeah, just moving on to case quickly. Basically, we're going to be solving for like pretty much everything that the AF is saying because of the fact that there is no wait period, and we're basically achieving the exact same thing of like hegemony with the government actually like sparking grassroots movements. Also, we're going to be basically the entire thing. The case debate comes as grandfathering. There is no period wait time between their plan and our plan. Therefore, we're going to be favoring the no.
Order of the PMR is going to be an overview. Can you please flow that on
New sheet?
no.
No?
Photo on the net spec show.
Their net spec stuff or I don't really have space, so I'm gonna float on a new sheet.
Yeah,
So make a note.
The order is going to be net spec. Specifying the second theory shell, so where you have to specify the branch of government. After that, it's going to be their theory shell. The branch of government and like their like funding spec shell are sort of going to be like side by side. I'll just be doing like a lot of signposting for those two.
Okay, so just to clarify, the net spec stuff is the normative ethical theory stuff? Okay, cool.
So it's going to be net spec, like government branch spec, and it's going to be funding spec.
Okay.
After that, it's going to be the counter plan. Actually, no, it's first going to be the anthro-colonialism advantages, and then it's going to be counter plan, and then dissats. Okay. Anyone not ready?
Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Grandfathering last, right?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Also, sorry, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the round. I've been climbing a lot lately, and so my forearm is kind of crampy, so it'd be helpful if we just go a little slower, because I'm trying to flow as much as I can, but my forearm kind of cramps a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Ready? Time starts in 3, 2, 1. The affirmation wins this debate because the negation drops all of the standards on both of the shells and the presumption triggers that my partner makes. Let's first go to the normative ethical theory shell. The first argument going to be the golden turns against counter standards. The first argument is that we literally raised our hands in our speech to also ask like both questions on like the government spec shell and in our ethical theory shell, which means that like you literally cannot say like if as to the point where you guys will not answer any POIs in your speech, which means that you literally also violate the shell no matter like your own interpretation, which means that both interpretations both lead you to an affirmation ballot. But even though we say that this is going to be an affirmation overburden, for the affirmation to be able to ask every single thing in order to be able to engage in a fair round, especially to the point where the negation on the when a negation runs a funding shell, like a spec shell, forcing the affirmation to also spec, this means that this supercharges both shells on an affirmation overburden. The third one's going to be there's absolutely no flex time in like high school debate, which means that you can't check back if you want to ask or not, because we literally cannot ask in a designated time to ask questions. The only time for us to be able to do is POIs, to where you literally reject it, which means that you literally violate your own competing interpretation. So if we default to competing interpretation, not only do you not have a we meet to our interpretation, which means that you literally violate it and like violate all of the standards that were coldly conceded, but you also violate your own counter interpretation, which means that you also violate your own counter standards. But even let's go to the counter standards. The first argument we have against breadth of education is they literally dropped the argumentation on our standard about how we should have depth of education over breadth of education, because breadth is non-unique in parliamentary debate. We should be focusing on depth of education, which means that it doesn't matter whether or not we increase breadth of education, but we should be focusing more on depth and specifically through different types of like cultural ethical theories, because it's important for us to have an open mind and understand that there are possible opponents who do not have like the same kind of ethical theories as us, and we need to create this open mindset through the theory shell. This is the first like starting point for us to be able to create a more open community and create that kind of fairness for us to be able to actually engage in the round. If we learn this, if we create an education system where everyone's going to default to utilitarianism because that's somehow the norm in the debate, this is just going to create an oppressive and bad portable skills to the point where you can also just like highlight the part where the negation literally says that education is a portable skill. So if we are teaching people bad ethics and bad education, then we're just going to be creating bad portable skills for the rest of our life, which is why it's so important to vote the normative ethical theory shell first, because we need to solve for this, because it has the biggest real world impact in round and in the community.
Our theory shells also have skews
Yeah,
eval.
our theory shell also has skews eval, which means that you should become first. This is also literally an affirmation presumption trigger that they literally drop, which means that you're going to be voting immediately for the affirmation here because you do not answer why presumption doesn't flow after no matter what. Even though they have this skew out of a round argument, literally we showed you that it's like you oppressing like certain debaters in the community who have possible different like normative ethical theory shells both in the round and outside the round is even worse than just skewing outside the round, because we have to look for structural fairness first. Even let's go on to the counter standards of Nora ethical theory shell. The first argument is that they do not answer the double bind, which means that once again, either way you're going to be voting 100% for the affirmation right here. They cannot have any kind of counter standards. They do not show why they don't violate our standards first. Second, it'd be real world education to the point where they also drop that Congress is literally doing these kinds of like Nora ethical theory because they do not want to have any kind of oppressive mindset. It means that you should always be valued because we are literally creating policy. We're literally simulating policy right now. The third one's going to be reciprocity because the affirmation literally says what our Nora ethical theory is, which means that the negation should also be able to reciprocate this so we both know what each other is thinking. It is not fair for us to be able to assume, especially to the point where the affirmation, where the negation keeps running counter interpretations, saying that we must ask and we must spec, which means that for them, which means that you should be holding them to the exact same high threshold. Okay. On the theory show, on the government spec theory show, first of all, you can cross-apply the exact same things as to why I said if, ask, competing counter-interpretations are bad. Second of all, they also don't offer a leeway to the interpretation of like specifying the government branch, which means that like once again they do that double bind where they violate both their counter-interpretation and their interpretation, cross-apply all of the analysis. Also onto competing interpretations, they say that it's going to be a time scoop, but we literally say that there's reciprocity in this round because we literally are bound to the resolution. So we say reciprocity does not equal time scoop because you literally create this time scoop yourself by not reciprocating to something that we ask because we are forced to violate the resolution, which means that once again it's always going to be an affirmation overburden. You can turn that standard. Let's go to their sheet. The first argument I wanted to do is like extend my partner's analysis how there's no funding required because the plan literally does not need funding. This is the first we meet that we read. The second we meet is that this is going to be normal ways and means, which means we literally spent what like kind of funding we're actually going to be doing or what the process is. The third argument is that once again you can cross-apply overburden here because they literally want us to specify, but then they tell us that we don't like that they don't need to specify, which means it's either going to be even more horrible. The third is that when you extend to counter standards, the counter standards are hard to debate in time scale. Literally when wholly conceded, which means that we actually have proven reasons as to why our counter standards is good on the theory shell and there's absolutely no abuse. For these reasons, we urge a strong vote for the affirmation.
Good job, y'all.
Oh, thank you.